What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with UFC will sign with Netflix in 2026 following ESPN's disastrous technical difficulties with the UFC 313 pay-per-view. Speculation that the promotion could be moving over to Netflix in 2026 is through the roof. And before we continue, make sure to leave a like on the video to help support the channel. As you likely know, 2025 is the final year of the UFC's broadcasting deal with ESPN, which was signed back in 2018, and in recent months, Dana White repeatedly acknowledged that the UFC could be headed to another network, or several, next year. But since Netflix is now a broadcast partner with the WWE, which has the same parent company as the UFC, a lot of folks believe it's a matter of time until we see the UFC on the streaming giant. Well, as noted, a lot of US-based customers were unable to watch the pay-per-view for last week's UFC 313 event. Not long after the card, Eric Richter of the New York Post reported that the UFC executives were, quote, absolutely furious with the technical difficulties ESPN had. Then, in a follow-up video on the New York Post YouTube channel, Richter talked in length about the growing tensions between ESPN and the UFC. According to Richter, ESPN is unhappy with the pay-per-view numbers, but for the UFC, the sign-up process that ESPN has customers go through is problematic, not to mention the technical issues that have occurred.
I talk to people who are close to fighters who say pay-per-view numbers are way down, right? Why is that? Well, and this has been the case since ESPN started, but if you look at prior to launching with ESPN versus now, it is a lot harder to purchase the pay-per-view. Why? ESPN, you have to have an ESPN Plus subscription, which is $10 a month just to purchase the pay-per-view. So there's red tape. It's automatically more difficult. Now you have to sign up for a subscription, then you also have to make a separate purchase for 80 bucks. So big problems there. The fighters getting less in pay-per-view points, that's almost like that part of their contract is almost becoming pointless because the pay-per-view buys are so much less. Like the UFC gets 300,000 pay-per-view buys as a buy-in from ESPN. There's no way that ESPN is getting 300,000 pay-per-view buys out of every pay-per-view.
Richter then proceeded to report that a source has told him the UFC will almost certainly sign with Netflix. But there's one hurdle, and that could be in regards to how will pay-per-views be incorporated into a Netflix subscription, assuming they will need to be.
When I put that article out on Sunday night, I got a call from somebody who's pretty well connected, and he said, almost definitely Netflix. Almost definitely. I would venture to guess that the UFC will do anything in their power to go to Netflix. For me, I think that Netflix, and they're gonna have to be careful too, right? Netflix is gonna pay a ton of money for the UFC. They have to be careful not to piss off their existing user base by upping the price of Netflix from whatever it is now. Is it 30 bucks a month to $50 a month? That's gonna piss off their existing user base. My prediction is that the UFC will sign on with Netflix starting at the beginning of 2026, and that the UFC will have a different package similar to ESPN Plus, but only UFC. Think about it as like UFC Plus.
In a post that has since been deleted, the UFC's Terrence McKinney noted he would welcome the promotion moving to Netflix. I can't wait to be able to watch UFC on Netflix. Every Saturday, everyone can tune in and just watch the fights. All my family can watch me now. Everyone has Netflix. $15 a month for just UFC plus $85 pay-per-views that lag and crash ain't it. Following Richter's report, Brendan Schaub posted the following on social media. This comes not long after Schaub opined that ESPN deliberately scuttled the UFC 313 pay-per-view as a means to show the UFC what's up. During his podcast, Schaub said this: the whole ESPN Plus pay-per-view not working, they're in negotiations for their broadcast rights right now. If you think that wasn't on purpose, you're out of your mind. That's ESPN, who doesn't give a flying f about the UFC really. They're in turmoil, but if you don't think that's a flex from them, I've never had issues with them. Now all of a sudden during rights negotiations, issues just pop up. That's someone going, oh really? You want to play hardball? This is what your numbers will look like without us. But what's your take on all this? Do you think ESPN deliberately kiboshed the UFC 313 pay-per-view? And how much would you be willing to pay Netflix each month if the subscription includes UFC pay-per-views? Marvin Vettori breaks silence after UFC loss. If you missed it, Marvin Vettori fought Roman Dolidze last night. One of the most memorable things to happen was Vettori walking out without a cup and having to go back and put one on. The fight ended up going to the judges' scorecard and Roman Dolidze won the fight, and he called out Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. Following the bout, Vettori shared the following video on his social media.
Yep, nothing too bad, just some cuts and bruises. Man, life sometimes shows you that even you give your heart out and everything you got, you still fall short. That was a close fight. Almost had him on the third, but I guess it wasn't enough. And yeah, man, I don't even know what to say. Just thank you to ATT, the best in the world, bro. Thank you, Dan, Mike, Makahan, Mako, JJ, everybody, bro. Even all the sparring partners helping me out. Love you, bro. Love you guys. And thank you, UFC. What the can I say, bro? I don't know. That's it.
This morning, Vettori went off on MMA Guru on X. The MMA Guru shared his reaction on the fight. Just gonna keep it real about Vettori versus Dolice 2. The fact that this was a fight between two of the top 10 fighters in the middleweight division is an embarrassment to the sport. Both look slow as and absolute dog at fighting. And Vettori wasn't too happy with this reaction. He called MMA Guru a sucker while sharing DMs of Guru asking for an interview. Nate Diaz teases UFC return. Nate Diaz is about to turn 40 and has recorded just one MMA win since 2019. But the Stockton superstar still has his sights set on hoisting a UFC title. Diaz fought out his UFC contract in September 2022 by submitting Tony Ferguson in the 4th round in their fight at UFC 279. The rugged veteran has boxed 2 times since then. In August 2023, he lost a decision to Jake Paul, and then in July of last year, he recorded a decision win over Jorge Masvidal. If you follow Diaz, you know that he's openly talked about his desire to return to the octagon at one point, provided that the opportunity and the money is right. So while speaking with Full Violence recently, Diaz reported that he still wants to return to the UFC to pursue a title. The problem is, according to the outspoken fighter, there's no opponent for him that's worth his while.
Well, everybody's boring right now, so I'm trying to do other for the moment, but I want to go back and get a UFC title.
Okay.
I don't want to fight for nothing, you know, I want to fight for something. So.
Okay. So is that in the works right now?
Yeah, well, right now there's nobody that's at an like, I don't really, who's the champion right now? 170.
Who is champion right now?
See? Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
So the fact that the interviewers didn't know that Belal Muhammad is the current UFC welterweight champion can be spun several ways. The fact that Diaz didn't know, however, is not surprising. But all that aside, would the UFC look at putting Diaz in a welterweight title fight right out of the gate? It seems very unlikely, even if the UFC is in desperate need of star power right now, as many folks are claiming. What seems far more likely is the UFC attempting to book Conor McGregor vs. Diaz 3, or Diaz vs. Dustin Poirier, which is a potential bout that's been talked about for years. But what do you think? Do you see the UFC bringing Diaz back for a title shot? Or is a super fight more likely? Ilia Topuria made a mistake moving up to lightweight division? The countdown to the official announcement that Ilia Topuria is going to battle Islam Makhachev continues. But we continue to hear from some pundits and fighters who are not convinced that El Matador should be moving up to 155 just yet. For some time, Topuria was open about the fact that he intended to move up to lightweight to pursue that division's title. But since Topuria had only defended the featherweight crown once when he bombed out Max Holloway in October, the consensus was he'd remain at featherweight for now. In fact, following that fight, Topuria said he would welcome a rematch with Alexander Volkanovski. So when Dana White announced not long ago that Topuria has vacated the featherweight title and is going up to lightweight, more than a few people were surprised. That news also kicked off extensive speculation that Topuria will be booked to fight the champion, Makhachev, next. Well, as noted, not everyone is completely sold on whether Topuria should be moving up right now. Case in point, recently, Matt Serra said he would have liked to see El Matador remain at 145 for now.
I think it's going to be interesting to see him at 155. I would have liked to see him at 145 a little bit more, because I feel like he had some big wins, obviously, with Volkanovski and Max Holloway, but I think it might be a little premature to go up. Not that he couldn't do it. I'm sure he could do it, but why not be a savage and clear out that division even more? You got Diego Lopez. You got other guys down there that are dangerous.
It was an interesting point, and others like Daniel Cormier have also questioned whether Topuria will be as effective against larger lightweights like Makhachev. But one person who has no doubt that Topuria will in fact win the UFC's lightweight crown is his teammate Guram Kutateladze. Recently, Kutateladze referred to Makhachev as Topuria's next victim, while acknowledging he expects that battle to be epic. What do you think? Should Topuria have stuck around at featherweight for a bit longer? And do you see him ending the reign of Makhachev? Paddy Pimblett ran into Colby Covington. Paddy Pimblett and Colby Covington have fired a lot of verbal shots at each other in the past, so after running into chaos recently at a power slap event, the baddie had some choice words for Covington. Since Pimblett joined the UFC, he's made it clear he doesn't care for Covington's well-documented antics and his persona. Chaos, meanwhile, argued at one point that Pimblett would never be a top 30 ranked fighter, and that prediction did not age well. In the recent video that went up on Pimblett's YouTube channel, he talked about his time in Las Vegas for UFC 313. And as mentioned, he also had this to say about Chaos.
Walked past Colby Covington, he stared at the floor, talks a big game online, his undies in person.
Pimblett's not the only fighter to make this claim about Covington, but the chances of these two fighting at some point in the cage seem slim to none. Although Covington is not a big welterweight, it would be shocking if he attempted to make 155 at this stage of his career, and for Pimblett, he could move into the title shot mix at lightweight if he beats Michael Chandler at UFC 314. Justin Gaethje provides update on injury. Not surprisingly, Justin Gaethje did not emerge from his memorable war with Rafael Fiziev unscathed, but while Gaethje's injury is nasty looking, it doesn't look like it'll keep the lightweight contender sidelined for too long. Gaethje is coming off a decision win over Fiziev at UFC 313 last week, in a fight that delivered plenty of fireworks, as everyone predicted. It marked the second time Gaethje recorded a win over Fiziev, as he bested the renowned striker by majority decision in 2023. Well, immediately after the fight, Gaethje was captured on video relaying that his toes were Now, in another post via his Instagram, the highlight shared the following image and quote, "They already showed you my feet on television, so here they are 1 week after the fight. This is from dragging my feet on the canvas when I threw punches. You do not want to be an Ultimate Fighter." So yeah, Gaethje's toes do look nasty, and that situation can't be comfortable at all. Michael Chiesa reacted to Justin Gaethje's injury, writing, "Canvas burns are the worst. You can't wear socks. It hurts to shower. You can't sleep with your sheets touching them or else the burns scab to your sheets. Not fun." But the good news is that one would think he'll be ready to fight in the not too distant future if needed. The big question now is, however, who will Gaethje fight next? There's been talk about granting him a title shot since he and the champion have never fought, but all signs point to Islam fighting Ilia Topuria next. So that could mean that Gaethje could be fighting Arman Tsarukyan next. Do you want to see that fight? Alex Pereira was hesitant against Magomed Ankalaev. Not everyone's convinced that Alex Pereira deserved to lose the light heavyweight crown to Magomed Ankalaev at UFC 313. But there's still a lot of talk about Pohatan's performance and why he was unable to defeat the new champ. For months, there was no shortage of folks who argued that Ankalaev would be Pereira's toughest test to date, and in fact, some observers argued that the UFC was avoiding the matchup out of fears that Pereira would lose the title. Well, while all three judges scored the fight for the well-rounded Ankalaev, the bout was far from a blowout. Case in point, Pereira defended all 12 of the Dagestani fighters' takedowns, and as noted, some people scored the fight for Poatan. More recently, TriStar's renowned coach Faraz Zahabi weighed in on the fight via his YouTube channel. Here was some of what he had to say about Pereira's performance. "It wasn't the most exciting fight, but here's what's amazing. Ankalaev outstruck him the whole fight. The whole fight was standing and Ankalaev wins. If you put these two in a kickboxing match, I think all of us would agree that Pereira wins. Why is it that he can outstrike him in an MMA match? Well, Pereira wasn't throwing, even though his corner was begging him to throw between rounds. Pereira was hesitant. After round 1, he was hesitant. He got stunned in round 1, and ever since he got stunned, he was hesitant. Now, I have my idea why I think he was hesitant. One, he was worried about the takedown. He didn't want to get taken down. It was on his mind when he got stunned. Now, he's worried about the striking and the takedowns. It was too much." What do you think of Zahabi's breakdown of the Pereira-Ankalaev fight? Was Pereira too gun-shy, and do you see Poatan winning the expected rematch? Alex Pereira accused of cheating at UFC 313? Magomed's team is accusing Alex Pereira of cheating at UFC 313 in a recent interview with Usha Taika. And before we continue, we have a favor to ask. Help us reach 200,000 subscribers on MMA Zone by subscribing and turning on notifications for daily MMA content. Seriously, we rarely miss a day. The interview is originally in Russian, but people online have translated it, and Magomed's coach, Sukrab Magomedov, has made some crazy accusations. According to Magomed and his team, they're accusing Alex Pereira of greasing. This is what they had to say. "When Magomed pushed him to the fence near our corner, it seemed to me that Pereira was greased with something. Ankalaev said afterwards that he smelled like he had some ointment on and was sticky. The sweat didn't flow off his body, it gelled up. That's what it looks like. On his body too." Interviewer: "That has been said about the Brazilians a lot. Glover Teixeira is really experienced in stuff like this." What are you guys' thoughts on the situation? Do you think Sukrab Magomedov is right? We're not saying it's 100% truth, but once again, accusations made by Magomed and his team.